and landing between two mats. My dad was an Olympics gymnastics coach. My sister was the youngest gymnastics judge in the world at the age of 18. I mean, we were a sporty family, and I grew up in the gym, and so that's what I wanted to do.
And you wanted to be different.
well, you know, I mean, look.
So you can let me ask you: were your parents like these people who pushed you when it came to sport?
No, actually the opposite. My dad said, "Look, I've done this route, and it's too hard. I want you to get a profession. It will be easier." So I think the deal went like this: you go through law school and you go to Harvard, and after you're done, you can do whatever you like. Well, by the time I was done, I was too fat and too old to do anything else but law. But all I'm saying here is, look, we can have two tracks, you know. I mean, if kids are really good and that's what they want to do, we have to let them excel. And if they're going to be globally good, frankly, you ask, well, when a child says they want to be a professional athlete, when do you take them seriously? Well, it depends on what sport. If it's gymnastics,
right.
It's as a 6-year-old because that's what they're up against. So, you know, if we want to be globally competitive and, you know, and compete seriously in sports, then we've got to allow both tracks.
Very interesting. Gosh, what a high-achieving sporting family, mate.
I know.
I'm
so impressed.
Big response from Fireworks. A wise man said Guy Fawkes was the only man who entered Parliament with honest intentions, says Mal and Pairoa. Please ban it totally for the sake of the animals. I loved them when I was a kid, but there is so much more fun for kids these days to make up for it. There wasn't even a McDonald's in my day. So thank you very much for your Fireworks feedback. Just finally, in the last couple of minutes, plans for the Sky Path cycleway and walkway over Auckland's Harbour Bridge are being held up due to a stoush over the concept design rights. The government announced last August it would fund and build the Sky Path, and initially things seemed to be skipping along fairly smoothly. Resource consent was approved, the funding allocated. But now, a murky situation has arisen concerning the Transport Agency and the Sky Path Trust, which owns the IP to this idea. In short, the trust owns the bridge design, and that means in order to use the design, the Transport Agency has to pay the trust to the tune of $1.6 million. Let's go to you first because it's an IP issue, mate.
Wow. I'm not an IP lawyer, but can I say I look at this and it's like all the other legal problems I've got. Before you enter into commercial arrangements, you need to sign the paperwork. And if you don't have the commitments in hand, it's pretty difficult to get started without them. And just presume that they will come later. They won't. You need, if you're going to embark on projects of this sort, you need to get all of that documentation and whose rights are whose sorted out before you start, because now it's just going to be a mess.
It's taken 10 years to get the design off the ground, John. It would be sad to see at this stage, we're going to get there to descend into squabble.
Well, she's answered on the legality side. I just want to use it. Come on, get it done.
True. I want to use it too. It would just be fantastic to be able to do that. They're just all going to have to get together and sort it out.
Yeah.
That's what they'll do. Without prejudice negotiations, off you go.
Yeah. Very, very good indeed. Why Fireworks just one day? Why focus? They're better in the winter, allow sales all year. That'll reduce frenetic focus on one relevant event. Then focus law on people who abuse them. Hey, you have been great, mate, Shen, and for the first time, John Pulu from Tangata Pacifica. Thank you very much. I'm back with you from 3:45, bright and sharp tomorrow afternoon. See ya.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, brace, 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 Air New Zealand's domestic airfares take a dip, in some cases by up to 50%. Is it enough to tame one of their harshest critics? We'll talk to Shane Jones. Former Prime Minister Jenny Shipley and 3 other Mainzeal directors are ordered to cough up $36 million, but it's too little too late for some unpaid subbies. Fugitive, unruly tourist James Nolan manages to skip out of the country on someone else's passport. So does he have a doppelganger? Short answer, no. Australian cleric Cardinal Pell is a convicted sex offender. He has been for months, but court orders mean Aussies are only just finding that out. We are practically everywhere on Checkpoint, Facebook Channel 50 and Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. A travel company operator says Air New Zealand's fare price cut will only benefit people who can be flexible in their travel arrangements. As of today, the airline is shrinking its lowest domestic fares by up to half. 750,000 seats a year will now be available for less than $50. More than 40 domestic routes will be affected, with flights between the North and South Islands starting from $39. But Flight Centre's commercial director, Brent Thomas, says many will miss out on the low fares.
It will help those people who can book a long time in advance or who are flexible with their dates. Those people who travel typically and book closer to the time of travel may not see the advantages because there's probably a very limited number of these seats that are going to be there on all the different routes that Air New Zealand do fly.
Brent Thomas. Air New Zealand says it's the biggest overhaul of its domestic pricing structure in more than a decade. A contractor left out of pocket by Mainzeal's collapse says it's taken years to get out of a financial hole and he doubts he'll get any money back. The construction firm went into liquidation in 2013, owing creditors $110 million. And today the High Court has ruled its directors traded recklessly and are liable for $36 million. Doug Hazelden, who's the managing director of concrete company South Island Shotcrete, says his company was never paid for its work.
I had to interject over $200,000 of my own money in my business to keep it going. It aged me a few years, no doubt, and ever since then I have been very wary of any business. I've got clauses in my contracts now that protect me, and if I don't sign the clauses that I have in them, I know they're not worthy of doing the job. That's a high-risk job, and I just won't do them anymore.
Doug Hazelden says $36 million isn't enough, and he doubts he'll see any of it. 3 people have been killed in a 4-vehicle crash on State Highway 2 west of Whakatane. Emergency services say all 3 victims died at the scene about 3 hours ago. Andrew McRae reports.
Initially, emergency services were told a truck and car had collided, but on reaching the scene, they found 4 vehicles involved. State Highway 2 has been closed near Hoane and Pikawai roads, and the police say they could be there for some hours. They want anyone who saw the crash to contact them, particularly a paraglider who was above the scene at the time. Traffic's being diverted, and the transport agency's warning drivers to allow an extra 45 minutes for travel times in the area. It says the road's unlikely to be reopened before 6:30. Ko Andrew McRae, tēnei.
The Department of Conservation is reviewing the safety of all 10 great short and day walks following revelations that safety warnings about the inclusion of Cape Kidnappers in that campaign were ignored. Documents show the department identified Cape Kidnappers as an unacceptable risky walk twice in 10 years before 2 tourists were seriously injured by a slip last month. The Director of Heritage and Visitors at DOC, Steve Taylor, says it's reviewing the way the Cape was selected to be part of the campaign, and the 9 other walks are also being reviewed.
It's an immediate priority at this stage, and I'm hoping to get those results, the outcomes of those, very soon.
Steve Taylor of DOC. Australia's most senior Catholic cleric is appealing against his convictions for child sex abuse and continues to maintain his innocence. Cardinal Pell was found guilty in December of abusing 2 choir boys in a Melbourne cathedral in 1996. But a suppression order has prevented the full details from being released until now. The ABC's Emma Younger reports.
His 5-week trial was told the 77-year-old senior Vatican official abused the choir boys after discovering them swigging altar wine in the sacristy, a room at the rear of the cathedral. Pell was also convicted of sexually abusing one of the boys a second time in a brief incident about 2 months later. Evidence of the assaults came from that former choir boy alone. Pell's other victim died in 2014 and never reported the abuse to police or his family.
Emma Younger reporting from the Victoria County Court. Villages on the Solomon Islands coast, where a ship is leaking more than 600 tonnes of oil, are starting to suffer from food shortages. The cargo ship, Solomon Trader, ran aground on a reef at Rennell Island, a World Heritage protected area, while loading bauxite late last month. Relief operations have been slow to start, and the ship has been leaking oil onto pristine reefs. One Rennell Islander, Derek Pongi, says the land in the area is not very productive and fishing is a key food source.
The people rely on the sea, but now it's all contaminated and polluted, so things are not looking good for my people back home. It's not good. It's not good.
Derek Pongi says the response from the Solomon Islands government has been wholly inadequate. It's 5:05. To sport now, and the Warriors have shown faith in coach Stephen Kearney by extending his NRL contract by another 3 seasons. That should keep him in charge until the end of 2022 campaign, at which point his tenure will equal the club record 6-year stint of Ivan Cleary from 2006 to 2011. The Warriors chief executive Cameron George says a desire for stability and the progress made by last year's team under Kearney prompted the long-term offer.
We had the right people in the right roles in providing stability, and that breeds a real opportunity for success on the field, and not just in the short term but long term. No doubt we're going to have a couple of bruises along the way, but the faith that I have in our leader on the field and Roger, Stephen off the field and the footy department provides this club with a platform to go forward in the future.
Cameron George. The Warriors play the Tigers in a trial match in Whangarei on Saturday. Meanwhile, the Newcastle Knights have plans to throw the bank at Kiwi star Kalen Ponga in order to lock him in until 2026. They're preparing a $7 million combined offer for him and veteran Mitchell Pearce. Ponga, who will play in the halves, says he wants to establish himself as a 5/8 before considering the deal. And the Southern Steel have a chance to seal their first win of the ANZ Premiership season when they face the Mainland Tactics in Christchurch tonight. The reigning champions lost 66-64 to the Northern Stars at the weekend, while the Tactics are coming off a 48-42 win over the Magic. The Southern Derby is set to start at 20-8. That's the news.
Doc knew of Cape Kidnappers danger.
3,750 people a year walking under those unstable cliffs that have been identified as an unacceptable risk by Doc.
Doctors walk off the job.
If we are exhausted, we cannot deliver good care, and we want to put our patients first and deliver good care.
And Oscar divas celebrate the drama.
Glenn Close, you've been my idol for so long, and this is not how I wanted it to be, and I think you're amazing. I love you very much. Lady Gaga.
With you on your daily commute. Morning reports, weekdays 6 till 9.
Then on 9 to noon, calls to better protect rest home residents. Is it time for a law change or even a minister for aged care? And after 10, President of the American Council of Libraries, Dr. Charles Henry, on the possibilities and extraordinary contribution brought to libraries by the digital age. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island. Mostly sunny, isolated showers about Gisborne clearing this afternoon. Cloudy periods from Taranaki to Wellington tomorrow with isolated showers at night. Marlborough and Nelson mainly fine, high cloud tomorrow with evening showers about Western Nelson and the Kaikoura coast. Bulla, fine today, drizzle turning to rain tomorrow afternoon with the chance of a thunderstorm then clearing. Westland and Fiordland drizzle developing this evening, a period of heavy rain tomorrow followed by showers and possible thunderstorms. Canterbury mostly fine, showers spreading north from tomorrow afternoon with thunderstorms and hail possible. Otago and Southland high cloud with a few spots of rain today, scattered showers tomorrow with possible thunderstorms and hail. Chatham Islands cloudy periods. It's 5:08 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Air New Zealand has taken some of the sting out of MP Shane Jones's tongue by slashing domestic airfares by up to 50% on some routes. The Minister has been a scathing critic of the airline, describing their ticket prices as an affront to the provinces that he says Air New Zealand has also abandoned. But today, the Regional Development Minister Shane Jones says while there is still room for improvement, he's happy to give credit where credit's due.
I'm actually ringing you from an office in the Koru Club Lounge, and Air New Zealand staff have freed up the office so that I can say positive things. But look, I've been a consistent critic, but I'm not a cheerless critic. And when you think about the putea we've spent in the Gisborne Airport and the Bay of Islands Airport, the fact that more travellers can move around Aotearoa at an affordable rate, obviously that's a positive outcome.
We have just punched some travel options onto their website. We could get to Invercargill to Rotorua for $218 return on the new airfares. Gisborne to Auckland return $39 each way. Have they gone far enough with this?
Oh, look, I haven't looked into all of the cobweb-like detail, but I'm taking Air New Zealand's. I'm taking them at their word. I know lots of families and people associated with
sports clubs, as you do, for example, bowling teams. This is going to be a big boost to helping garden variety kiwis move around the country. And, it would appear that their strategy has changed. And I think a lot of these decisions will resonate in areas such as Gisborne and Kirikiri.
Do you take any credit for that change in strategy?
I just knew you were going to ask that question. Far be it from me to grab the laurels of credit, but if others feel kindly disposed to bestow that upon me, who am I to deny it?
Do you reckon this is sustainable? Obviously, last month Air New Zealand slashed their earnings forecast. So is this cutting prices on domestic routes? Is that sustainable, do you think? I mean, it is supposed to be a company, a business, a profitable business.
Yeah, I suspect that their strategy, it has to change to meet not only competition, but hey, in business like politics, nothing is static. And they've obviously gone for a strategy that has a view that the volume is good and you can spread costs across a greater number of bums on seats. And at the end of the day, the board would have signed it off. Whatever differences I've got with the CEO, I've always regarded him as a real businessman. I had no regard for the last CEO there. I thought that person was a show pony. But I think this CEO, he realises if he's going to continue to operate effectively both domestically and internationally.
Well, the thing is, though, Minister, if they're doing this now, if they can afford it now, presumably they could afford it before. So have they been rorting New Zealanders all this time?
Oh, look, you know my views. My views since I became a Member of Parliament, that they needed to sharpen their act and stop taking the provinces for granted. I got told off, obviously, because there was a sense politically I went too far and had a crack at the chairman. So I respect the fact that the Prime Minister made that call, but I told everyone I would not put a stone on my tongue. I would continue to advocate for provincial New Zealand. And their marketing team, their sales team, their finance people obviously come up with this particular approach, and I have to take them at their word that it's not a gimmick.
OK, so you've said their prices were too rich in the past. I notice in their press release they are asking for other tourist operators, hotels, rental car companies and tourist experience operators to follow their lead and shrink their fees. What do you make of that?
Well, I think once you have a larger volume of throughput, then you've got a bigger wedge of the market to manage the cost structure of any business. And it's not unreasonable that they challenge other stakeholders in the regions, but those decisions will have to be made by the local people.
Yeah, but what do you think of that? Because you've been very outspoken about what Air New Zealand could do to cut its prices. What about regional operators, hotels, rental car companies, other tourist operators? Is it time for this to step up and cut their prices too?
Yeah, I'd certainly like to see other economic stakeholders and businesses be very efficient and offer, look, an accent on delivering good service, an accent on experience, and they've got to be profitable, but not excessively, in my view.
This is great news for a lot of people who maybe travel off-peak. Is it going to make any difference to business people who want to go at peak times? Are they still going to be pinged several $100s to do that, do you think?
Yeah, look, I've got to be balanced. My concern, as I've spoken about, is that regular travellers need to be able to move around Aotearoa at an affordable rate. And I'm only hopeful that this particular announcement doesn't become like a nana fare. If you're nana and you're going at a time when no business person is travelling, then you can move around for free. Presumably, I've thought about that. But I have to tell you, people who go in and out of the provinces, they're continually complaining to me about the excessive amount of pūtea they're paying just to go from Wellington to Nelson. But look, today I'm taking Air New Zealand at their word, and I hope that these fare changes are more than just a nana fare. Nana going to visit the mokopunas.
When was the last time you sat on the tarmac in an Air New Zealand plane that didn't leave on time?
I've given up trying to fly in and out of Whangarei. Because they must have engineers that are working 24/7, because that flight is always falling victim to engineering difficulties. So if I am going to Whangarei, by and large, I drive.
So what, there's still some areas where they need to pull their socks up?
Yeah, Air New Zealand will always be... Air New Zealand is always going to suffer the verbal depredations of my good self. However, today, let's give credit where credit's due, and hopefully it's not just a gimmick.
That's Regional Development, Economic Development Minister Shane Jones there. Let us know what you think of the price drops and the times that you can travel in. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. After 6, I'll be talking to aviation commentator Irene King and get her verdict on what she thinks of the changes. The case against the directors of failed construction giant Mainzeal is not over yet, with an appeal on the cards after today's breakthrough decision. Mainzeal was the country's third largest construction company when it collapsed in 2013, owing creditors more than $110 million. Last year, the liquidators took 4 of its directors, including former Prime Minister Jenny Shipley, to court. Today, the High Court ruled the directors had failed in their duties and are liable for $36 million. Tom Furley has more.
The collapse of Mainzeal sent ripples through the construction sector, especially for the raft of contractors working under them like Christchurch concrete company South Island Shotcrete.
I was ringing chasing for money and all the rest of it, and I was found out in the news that they went popped. Their staff didn't even know. All their staff, project managers, and that rang me up that night and were as horrified they were out of a job as well. So, all fairness, they had no idea either. It was just the managing directors that just kept it from everybody, and they've been found liable, which is fantastic.
That's its managing director, Doug Hazelden, who says it's taken years to get out of the hole he was left in.
I had to interject over $200,000 of my own money in my business to keep it going. It aged me a few years, no doubt, and ever since then I have been very wary of any business. I've got clauses in my contracts now that protect me, and if I don't sign the clauses that I have in them, I know they're not worthy of doing the job. It's a high-risk job, and I just won't do them anymore.
When Mainzeal collapsed, it owed unsecured creditors more than $110 million. More than $40 million was to subcontractors. BNZ, a secured contractor, was paid out in full. The liquidators, BDO, took the directors to court in an 8-week trial last year, alleging they had breached their duties and traded recklessly. Mainzeal was effectively insolvent from 2005 through to its collapse in 2013, with its parent company, Regina Pacific Group, taking millions from it for investment in China in the form of loans it couldn't repay. However, Mainzeal continued to trade for years, relying on promises of financial support from Regina Pacific Group and subsequent assurances from its director, Richard Yan, which were not reliable. Today, in an 178-page decision, Justice Francis Cook found Mainzeal's directors had traded recklessly in the lead-up to its 2013 collapse. Richard Yan has been found to have the greatest liability, as he induced the directors to breach their duties and benefited considerably from the funds extracted from Mainzeal. Justice Cook ruled he'd be liable for $36 million, of which $18 million is shared equally between Dame Jenny Shipley and its former chief executives Clive Tilby and Peter Gom. Liquidator at BDO, Andrew Bethel, says while it's less than the $75 million they sought, it is still a good result.
We're very happy that the High Court's found that the directors breached their duties, for a start. $36 million, as well as a significant amount of money to be awarded in the context of New Zealand reckless trading cases. So, no, we're thrilled with the result.
Mr Hazelden says he doubts he'll see a cent of it.
And the receivers are going to get how much out of that $36 million? That they get paid first, all the lawyer bills and all the courts get paid first, and then the actual debt, people that owe the debt, get paid last.
However, Greg Wallace, the Deputy Chair of the Specialist Trade Contractors Federation, says it's a partial win for subcontractors left in the lurch.
Is it going to recoup some of the sub-trades that ended up in receivership or liquidation? No. Is it enough financial recourse? Probably not. But what we hope from this decision today is that directors and companies that are trading today realise that they will be liable for the company's financial responsibilities.
Richard Yan's lawyer confirmed this afternoon he will appeal the decision. He has 20 working days to file papers to the Court of Appeal. In a statement on behalf of Dame Jenny, Mr Tilby and Mr Gom, law firm Chapman Tripp said the basis for finding liability appeared to have novel aspects, which they'd need to carefully consider. They're still considering their options. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Fugitive unruly tourist James Nolan only bears a fleeting resemblance to the photo in the passport he used to flee New Zealand, according to a customs boss. Nolan had been charged with reckless driving and assault and was also wanted for being part of an alleged roofing scam. Yet he managed to use someone else's passport to skip out of the country while he was on bail. A customs officer failed to do proper further checks after the e-gate system flagged that his photo didn't match the one on the passport he was carrying. Customs Group Manager of Border Operations, Terry Brown, explains what happened after the e-gate signalled there was a problem.
Mr Nolan departed New Zealand on the 26th of January. He used the e-gate process and the image of his face and the biometric image in the passport did not match our algorithm threshold. This automatically refers the image to a customs officer who manages a tool called our decision review tool. He reviewed and accepted the image and the passport biometric image as a match and erred.
Okay, can I just stop you there, because this bit is quite important. Have you seen the picture in the passport and the picture taken at the airport of James Nolan? Have you seen those two pictures?
Yes, I have.
Okay, do they look alike?
There is a fleeting similarity, but the purpose of having invested in our e-gates and biometrics facial recognition technology is to ensure that it removes the human interface so that we...
I know, but you had a situation here where you did require a human to intervene and verify either way, and you just said there was a fleeting resemblance. So this person let him through on the basis of a fleeting resemblance?
No, the person let them through on the basis that the technology had identified that it was a low match with the algorithm threshold, and so it's then subject to a second scrutiny. There are other layers of defence which should have been applied and were not applied. That includes the face-to-passport check and the request for further identification to substantiate the person's identity.
So he was never asked for other identification to prove that he was the person in the passport?
Not in this instance, no.
Okay, so who let him through and didn't do that?
Well, an officer made a judgment based on their own interpretation of the two images. They made an error in accepting the image as a match, and that's part of a review process that we'll undertake now. How
senior was the customs officer? How experienced?
The officer has had quite limited engagement in customs, but has been employed specifically to do this type of role.
So what do you mean by limited? A couple of years in the business or what?
Less than 2 years, but again has got a primary purpose of delivering this function and task.
Terry, you've seen the pictures, as you said. Would you have let him through based on that image?
I certainly would have referred it to the next tier or threshold of checks, and that is a concern that was not done.
Okay, so whose name was the passport in?
I can't state that because that's subject to ongoing inquiries by the police.
Generally, where was the passport from? What country?
I can't state that. It's
Why not?
Inappropriate to state that, Lisa, because that's an inquiry that the police are undertaking, and I'm not going to jeopardise any inquiries that they're making.
Okay. To be clear, though, it was a real passport for a real person.
It's a genuine passport. It was not reported as lost or stolen. And, to put it into perspective, we are unaware of any other instances where a person has purposely sought to circumvent our controls through the fraudulent use of a valid passport.
And I understand that, but how would you know if they got through and got away with it? You wouldn't know. So in this case, you've discovered that you've let someone through who shouldn't have gone through. In terms of the passport that you say is a genuine passport, is the person who owns that passport, are they in New Zealand?
Yes, they're in New Zealand.
Are they visiting New Zealand?
They are visiting New Zealand, and again, any other inquiries would need to be deferred to police.
So do you know if they've been spoken to?
I'm not aware of that, no. I'm not privy to the police inquiries.
Let's go back to the identification. How serious a botch-up is this?
Look, in the perspective of the circumstance I've identified, we do place, and rightly so, a high degree of confidence in the biometrics facial recognition technology. It's sound, it's continually developing and getting better. It's universally regarded as a very sound means of facilitating legitimate passengers and stopping those.
But it's not a failure with the
legitimate.
e-gate, is it? It's not a failure of the e-gate. The e-gate did exactly what it's supposed to do. It said, hang on a minute here, this guy doesn't look like the picture in the passport. So it's a human failure. One of your customs officers failed to escalate this. So how serious is that?
Well, that's serious, and we're obviously displeased about that, which is why we'll conduct a review to see whether our internal processes are sufficient to protect us against a future event. But again, it is quite unusual, given the circumstances of someone knowingly and willingly making available their genuine passport to another person to use for fraudulent use.
Had you seen any of the coverage about the so-called unruly tourists, or were you oblivious to this group?
I'm familiar with the media coverage, yes.
Right, OK. So when a guy turns up and he's got a passport that sets off an alert and he's got a British accent, no red flag goes up at all?
No, that's where you're mistaken. It's not setting off an alert. It's simply...
it's telling you the two do not match. Yeah, they're telling you the two do not match, which I would have thought was a warning bell at the very least. Would that be fair to call it that?
No, I don't think that's fair at all.
I
think what you need to understand, Lisa, is that people that elect to use the e-gates, and it's an election, they can elect to go to a booth and be processed by an officer face-to-face. People that elect to use the e-gate, the algorithm threshold that's set up may still reject them from going through the e-gate for a variety of reasons, and it might still be a valid passport.
I do understand that. You have explained that to me, and I do understand that. But what you had here is when the e-gate suggested to you that the real person in the picture didn't marry up, you had a failure to pick up the difference by the customs officer who then dealt with it. If I can just go back to the fact that...
And Lisa, we're not denying that. In fact, I've said that it is a human error, and we regret that.
So there was extensive coverage about this group called the Unruly Tourists, extensive coverage. But apart from that, the police say in a statement today that they had already discussed the situation with agencies including Customs after James Nolan failed to turn up at a court appearance and a warrant for his arrest was issued. That as part of the investigation to locate James Nolan, they got in contact with Customs and ensured that border alerts were in place. Now, I know that no alert was set off as such, but you had a situation here where a person did not match their passport. They have a British accent, and anyone who might have been watching the news at any point over the last few weeks would have maybe seen some coverage of this situation. How do you explain that they did no further checks?
I'm not certain if you've asked a question or made some statements, but I'll endeavour to respond. So we have 14 million travellers that go back and forth from our airports in the last financial year. We have an alert system which is structured. It's predicated on knowing the identity of the individual. In this instance, Mr. Nolan departed New Zealand under a fictitious name, using a genuine passport and masqueraded as that person. So having an alert in the name of Nolan would not have intercepted him in this instance.
Not in terms of the passport, but wouldn't it have put you on alert? I understand, and I'll let you finish, but I just need to clarify this point. I understand that that passport would not set off an alert, but given you had been warned that this guy might be trying to leave the country, wouldn't that have put you on alert generally?
So when police consulted us, we made inquiries, and that's where we identified that Nolan had departed using this passport. So that is the reality. I think it's a little bit mischievous to suggest that officers would have familiarity of Nolan trying to depart New Zealand on a genuine but fraudulent use of a passport. Candidly, had Nolan attempted to depart, had he had possession of his own passport, that would have been subject to alert. He needed to go down this course of action simply because he didn't have possession of his passport that was in the possession of police under bail conditions. So, you know, in going round in circles, I think we're identifying that this is a unique set of circumstances which is predicated largely by the willful provision of a travel document by a third party to make it available to Nolan. Now, the officers should have still picked it up. I'm making no excuses for that, and that's unfortunate, but I don't believe in the context of 40 million passengers and the fact that we manage our alert system so very successfully and have done over a number of years, that there's any reason for the public to be concerned that suddenly we're a porous border.
Is it that simple, though? You just get a passport that vaguely looks like you and you can get through?
No, and that's why I talked about the large security arrangements. We got to Tier 2. There's another 2 to 3 tiers that are available to us. There was a human error that did not follow through. It's regrettable that any person can achieve what they've achieved by these means, and we're very unhappy about it.
And that's Customs Group Manager Border Operations Terry Brown. On Checkpoint on RNZ National, what Grant Robertson told an Auckland business audience about a capital gains tax. Doc runs the safety ruler over its Great Day walks and the future of New Plymouth's Yarrow Stadium. We tell you about that too. We would love to hear your feedback. Don't forget, you can text in on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And here's Susanna with the headlines.
Dramatic fare cuts have been announced this afternoon by Air New Zealand, which is cutting its lowest fares by up to half on more than 40 domestic routes. The airline says the move is to shrink fares, and it is the biggest overall of its domestic pricing structure in more than a decade. Flights within and between both islands will be available for as little as $39. The Regional Development Minister Shane Jones has told Checkpoint he applauds the airfare price cuts. Cardinal Pell has been found guilty of sexual offences in Australia, making him the highest-ranking Catholic figure to receive such a conviction. A jury has found Pell abused 2 choir boys in a Melbourne cathedral in 1996, and a verdict handed down in December, but only just released for legal reasons. Cardinal Pell had pleaded not guilty, and he's lodged an appeal against his conviction. A contractor left out of pocket by Mainzeal's collapse says it's taken years to get out of a financial hole and he doubts he'll get any money back. The construction firm went into liquidation in 2013, owing creditors $110 million. And today the High Court has ruled its directors traded recklessly and are liable for $36 million. The head of concrete company South Island Shotcrete, Doug Hazelden, says he will never be paid for his firm's work and dealing with Mainzeal has taken years off his life. Police investigating how a British tourist managed to skip the country using someone else's passport. James Nolan is wanted for assault and for being part of a roofing scam, but managed to leave New Zealand after a major error by a customs staff member. The Group Manager of Border Operations, Terry Brown, has told Checkpoint he was let through even though the e-gate biometric system picked up that there was a discrepancy between his appearance and passport photo. He says he would have ordered the next threshold of checks if it had been up to him. Those are the headlines. I'll be back with more news at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And time for business now with Madison Reedy. So, Tourism Holdings has reported a fall in profits. What's going on there?
Tourism Holdings isn't quite the household name, but to make it a little bit more relatable, Tourism Holdings owns the Waitomo Glowworm Cave operations. It also owns the Kiwi Experience bus tours and a number of camper van rental businesses across the world as well. Their half-year profit that they reported this earlier today was down to 17.5 million from 23 million the previous corresponding period. Now, that could paint the picture that the tourism boom locally is starting to turn into a bust, but actually the devil in the detail shows that their fall in profit was mostly due to less of those camper van sales offshore. And also they've invested more in their digital business as well. So over the past 2 years, they've spent about $8 million on charting a new revenue stream in the digital space. Now, that's a lot of money for a small company whose net profit for a half-year period is only about $18 million. But looking ahead, they say that there is some uncertainty about the local tourism business and also offshore, but they do say that their order book is looking pretty strong, so they're not too worried.
It's kind of interesting in the context of Air New Zealand asking regional operators to lower their prices, and here you have a company that hasn't done as well as what it would have expected. Yeah. Mercury, also in the same boat, downwards with the profit.
It was all a little bit red today, wasn't it, on the business news desk? So Mercury, which is the partly state-owned power company, they reported their half-year net profit today, and they were down 20% to $104 million. Now, that's largely due to low levels of water in their hydro lakes, which they have a lot of in the Waikato area, and also because they paid more to cover the cost of future demand. But their revenue was up quite positively, 13% to over $1 billion for that 6-month period to December. And that's because they hiked prices to offset that fall that they had in generation. So they kind of made up the losses just in time for their financial year result there. And remember that in October last year, spot pricing was at a 7-year high, something that the Electricity Authority actually ended up investigating and still ongoing there. Mercury says that it has learned from that, but it also interestingly called for thermal generators, so generating thermal energy. They called for them to be a bit more transparent about their supplying capacity so that the market knows what they're doing in real time. Also interestingly, they lost 7,000 customers in that half-year period as well. Now, that's a big issue for all power companies at the moment, and the CEO, Fraser Winneray, actually called the competition at the moment brutal, is what he said.
Interesting. Any other ups and downs on the market that we need to know about?
No. Sorry, down actually. The NZX Top 50 Index closed down 22 points to 9,323 points. But worth mentioning that that's actually super close to a record high for the New Zealand market. So a record high would be 9,381. So we're just a few points off that.
Dollar?
Sorry, the New Zealand dollar is buying at 68.8 US cents, 96.1 Australian and 52.4 British pence.
Fantastic. Madison Reedy with all your numbers there for business. Hey, we're getting a lot of feedback, speaking of business, on Air New Zealand and the slashing of the fares today. So let's get to a little bit of it now. This person says, well done, Air New Zealand. Outstanding company. Damned if they do and damned if they don't, by the pompous, arrogant Shane Jones, who forgets the $1 billion required by the government in dividends and tax from a very successful company. More Air New Zealand, less Shane Jones, says Ruben. Thanks, Ruben. And Jane has texted in to say, try flying to Invercargill to Wellington 2 years ago. Air New Zealand was $865 return for 2 adults. Dunedin to Wellington, $765. Jetstar, Queenstown to Wellington, $346 return for 2 adults. Jane says, we've been ripped off for years. Keep your feedback coming. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can text in on 2101. The Australian cleric, Cardinal Pell, has become the highest-ranking Catholic clergyman in the world to be convicted of child sex offences. The 77-year-old was found guilty of 5 charges of child sexual abuse last December, relating to the abuse of 2 13-year-old choir boys while he was Archbishop of Melbourne in 1996. But details of his trial and convictions are only being made public now after suppression orders were lifted. And the BBC's Hywell Griffith has been following the case and has this report from Melbourne.
He returned from Rome claiming he would clear his name, but Cardinal Pell, once one of the Pope's closest advisors, now faces going to jail. The 77-year-old was for many years the face of the church in Australia, revered for his intellect and uncompromising manner. But Pell also used his power to manipulate and abuse. In 1996, in one of his first services as Archbishop in Melbourne Cathedral, Pell found 2 choir boys helping themselves to communion wine. He told them that they were in trouble and then, grabbing them by the head, forced both into a series of sexual acts. In his rise through the ranks of the Catholic Church in Australia, George Pell became responsible for dealing with the abuse perpetrated by other priests. Here in Melbourne, he claimed credit for setting up a world-first system to counsel and compensate victims. But for decades, his crimes remained hidden. George Pell reached the top level in the Vatican, becoming its treasurer. From Rome, he gave evidence to an inquiry into abuse in Australia.
The Church is, in many places, certainly in Australia, has mucked things up, has let people down. I'm not here to defend the indefensible.
But some feel Pell has further crimes to answer for, accusing him of concealing abuse and protecting other abusers.
He had a vested interest in covering it up. The whole hierarchy of the Catholic Church aided and abetted pedophile priests and brothers to rape and molest thousands upon thousands of children.
Pell has always denied covering up abuse. He has already been removed from Rome's inner circle, but as a cardinal, he has kept his title. There are calls for the Pope to force him to resign, with his own credibility at stake.
The only way that the Pope can get out of this sort of situation is really to demand, in my view, that he step down from his functions as a cardinal.
For months, there has been frustration in Australia that until now, the details of his abuse could not be reported.
Cardinal Pell, any message to your supporters today?
News of his conviction will send shockwaves across the Catholic Church and expose, once again, its failure to deal with the dark history of clerical abuse.
And that's Hywell Griffith reporting there. And here's some of the reaction from outside the court today when the convictions were made public.
He has destroyed the Victorian community. The Catholics in Victoria, we demand that he be excommunicated from the church. George Pell is a monster, a freak. He has to be jailed. No home detention, none of this pathetic, weak justice. We want to see him in jail. We want to see him fry in hell forever. He is solely responsible in Victoria for the pedophile damage that has been done and damaged thousands and thousands and thousands of people throughout Victoria.
One of Pell's two victims died a few years ago. The other victim gave a statement which was read by his lawyer, Viv Waller, in which he said he had suffered shame, loneliness and depression, and also pleaded for privacy.
I understand that this is a big news story, but please don't reveal my identity. I ask that the media respect my privacy. I don't want to give any interviews. Please don't come to my home. I want to protect my young family and my parents. I don't want them swept into the spotlight. I am not a spokesperson about child sexual abuse. There are many other survivors and advocates who bravely fill this role. I am just a regular guy working to support and protect my family as best as I can.
Lawyer Viv Waller there reading a statement from one of George Pell's victims, and Pell's lawyer has confirmed he has lodged an appeal against the convictions. The Department of Conservation is reviewing the safety of its Great Day walks after it failed to act on advice that its Cape Kidnappers track was risky. Two tourists were seriously injured by a slip while walking on the foreshore below Cape Kidnappers last month. It follows the release of information showing that DOC knew for 10 years the walk was unsafe, but appeared to do little. Here's our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley.
The massive slip came down on two Korean tourists as they walked around Cape Kidnappers last month. They were walking along the foreshore when part of the cliff gave way, seriously injuring the pair and pushing them out to sea. Documents now released under the Official Information Act show DOC was aware of the danger posed by the cliff. It first identified the walk as, quote, a significant and unacceptable risk in 2009. Another risk assessment in 2017 had the same findings and recommended a geotechnical report of the hazards along the entire walk be carried out, not just the small bit of land that DOC owned. But it was never done. DOC's Director of Heritage and Visitors, Steve Taylor, says a large section of the walk, including the section along the beach, falls under the jurisdiction of the Hastings District Council, but he admits something went wrong.
As events have come to light, it's been clear that the identification of that as a day hike has raised some serious questions actually around the process by which we have undertaken the full risk evaluation for the complete walk.
The Cape Kidnappers Walk was one of the great short and day walks selected by DOC and promoted to tourists in a marketing campaign in September 2017. Emails show some DOC staff expressed concern about the inclusion of the Cape because of the risks, but they were essentially ignored. Mr Taylor says the final decision to include it in the promotion was made by DOC's Recreational and Tourism Unit. He says that decision-making process is being reviewed, as are the risk assessments and suitability of all 10 walks in that campaign.
We're looking at the other day walks to ensure that there's no unacceptable risk in them. It's an immediate priority at this stage, and I'm hoping to get those results, the outcomes of those, very soon.
In the meantime, Cape Kidnappers Beach remains closed until a geotechnical survey is completed by the Hastings District Council. RNZ has learned the draft report recommends keeping the beach closed while a quantitative risk assessment is performed. This also means Gannett Beach Adventures, which runs tractor tours along the beach, will also remain closed. Its owner, Colin Lindsay, told RNZ the documents released by DOC confirms his fears that the inclusion of the Cape Walk in its marketing campaign was rushed and ill thought out. He says he's waiting for the geotech report before assessing his future. The former Mayor of Hastings District Council and now Tukituki MP, Lawrence Yule, says cool heads need to prevail.
What I'm just asking for as we manage this by all the agencies is a bit of common sense prevail. There is some risk in everything in life. We need to minimise those risks, but we won't know what the significant risk of earth movement is until the geotech report has been further done.
The Conservation Minister, Eugenie Sage, says she's keeping tabs on DOC's investigation into its decision-making around Cape Kidnappers, and she won't be making any further comment until it's complete. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It's about 12 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what's on your mind, what you think of the Air New Zealand fares, publicity stunt or a big change in the domestic market. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also let us know what you think of being able to get through customs using someone else's passport. The Finance Minister has tried to reassure the Auckland business community nothing is set in stone with the new tax proposals, including what a capital gains tax might look like. People attending the event, hosted by the Auckland Chamber of Commerce, told RNZ the wait for a final government decision is creating uncertainty for those who could be affected. It was the first major speech of the year for Grant Robertson, where he traversed the international economic climate, the upcoming May budget and the tax working group's report. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Business people, farmers and those owning more than one property are all in the frame for a potential capital gains tax. The government's been at pains to point out it has to reach agreement with governing parties, New Zealand First and the Greens, before settling on a final plan, and everything except a water tax remains on the table. After his speech, Mr Robertson fielded questions, most about the potential capital gains tax.
We're not bound by the whole of the report. I think if you put a group of tax experts in a room, they're going to design a tax system that maintains simplicity, and as a result what they've done is they've come up with something that says income is income wherever it comes from.
Then a blunt question from the Chamber's Chief Executive, Michael Barnett.
I'm sitting here thinking, if I threatened you...
Please don't.
And then backed off, I'll always be remembered for the threat. And I'm looking at, your government and its brand and asking, does this document do any damage to you and your brand because it says how you're prepared to treat New Zealanders?
Eliciting this response from the Minister.
Oh no, I don't think that's fair. To start with, it's not our document in the sense that the working group wrote it and we let them, with the restrictions I mentioned before, we let them do that. So, I think from our perspective it's our job to work through what we decide from it that we might want to implement.
Business people who'd come to hear Mr Robertson speak were asked for their personal view on how he was selling the working group recommendations.
There's a lot of, hard-working Kiwis that have worked all their life, saved up, bought a property so they don't rely on the state for their income in their later years, now being put through a lot of stress over these announcements, which are really starting to hurt a few people.
I think the challenge is trying to understand how much of this is actually going to come into being, and to the extent to which the sort of soundbite economy that we live in is going to challenge the results that come from it.
There seems to be a lot of consensus gathering, but sometimes just calls and decisions need to be made.
The government says it intends to confirm its final plan by the end of April. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
In the last couple of hours, 3 measles cases have been confirmed in Canterbury. A teenager and a man and a woman in their 40s. They're from Christchurch and Rangiora. This comes only days after it was revealed an 18-year-old University of Otago student in Dunedin contracted the disease. The Canterbury DHB says none of the 3 people affected had up-to-date vaccinations for measles, and that ensuring MMR injections are up to date is the best protection against the disease, which can be life-threatening. Our South Island video journalist Logan Church spoke to the Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Raymond Pink, at a Christchurch health centre a short time ago.
This office has been notified of 3 confirmed cases of measles. These cases include a teenage male and a female in their 40s from the Rangiora and Christchurch. And as far as we're aware, the cases were not fully immunised.
And when were these cases confirmed?
Our first case was confirmed on Friday of last week, and our last 2 cases were confirmed yesterday, the 25th of February.
And these 3 people, how are they now?
They're all recovering really well. 2 were admitted to hospital, but 1 wasn't, and there is 1 remaining, I understand, and continues to improve.
I suppose any confirmation of measles is obviously a worry to any DHB, especially only days ago down in Otago Way it was confirmed that a student down there had contracted measles. How worried is the CDHB now?
I think that the District Health Board is putting a lot of resource into identifying cases, chasing contacts, and ensuring that we can limit as much as possible any new cases in our community. And I think that emphasis reflects the concern and the importance that the DHB places on managing this illness. It's an illness which has complications. It's an illness that's potentially fatal. It's an illness that can be protected by immunisation, best protection.
And what sort of symptoms will someone have if they have measles?
You can have common cold symptoms, a runny nose, a cough, and a temperature associated with that. And this worsens to a point over 3 or 4 days where you develop a rash. And you can also have sticky eyes with that as well. And so over that 48-hour period where the rash appears, a person is really, really quite sick, and then they slowly recuperate after that. They are infectious from the time their symptoms begin until 5 days after the rash appears. I think we are continuing to follow up contacts. Obviously, it's a highly infectious disease, and so those contacts, particularly who aren't immunised, are a concern, and so that process is happening. And I think at the moment there is 1 potential case that we won't know the results for until tomorrow, but at this stage it's only 3 confirmed cases.
How many suspected cases?
We have had close to, besides the 3 confirmed cases, we've had, I believe, 5 suspect cases who have all been cleared following testing that has been done.
How important is it to nip this in the bud now?
It's always important to make sure, actually, that we don't ever see measles, and we have the technology for that with our vaccination. And so, if it does appear in our community, it's really vital that we limit its spread and put a lot of energy into that.
And that was Canterbury Medical Officer of Health Raymond Pink talking to Logan Church there. Just how much should be spent on the upgrade to New Plymouth's Yarrow Stadium? Well, whatever it costs, ratepayers will be footing the bill. The 17-year-old stands have been empty since mid-2018 as its owners ponder the option of spending $55 million reinforcing the stands or knocking them down altogether. Taranaki Regional Council has recommended a basic fix, but if other parties come on board, the project could become a $271 million state-of-the-art covered stadium. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin reports.
The covered seating at Yarrow Stadium has been off limits since June 2018 after the stands were deemed an earthquake risk. They were built in 2002 for $17 million and upgraded just before the 2011 Rugby World Cup. Taranaki Regional Council Chairman David McLeod says it now seems unlikely anyone will be held accountable for the building's failures.
Clear now that there is limitations on how long ago we can actually take a case on a consultant, an engineer, a builder, whatever, that may have done something perhaps that's not quite right. So there's that statute of limitation has led us to the difficult situation that's very unlikely that we're going to be successful in that.
Mr McLeod says he's also given up hope of getting an insurance payout. The Regional Council, which owns the stadium, today recommended a repair job that would return it to its former state. But what it really wants is more funding for a significant upgrade with brand new facilities. That would include a boost to the hospitality areas, which received about $3 million only 2 years ago. Other options on the table today range from demolishing the stands and sowing grass in their place to building a new state-of-the-art covered stadium at a cost of $217 million. On the streets of Stratford, plenty of people thought a simple repair job would represent a lost opportunity.
I think we should go all out and bring money into the community, into the Taranaki.
I reckon we need a new stadium because it's just going to pull more and more and more. So I think you get your returns on it if you put your money in.
4. So there's more things for the money that you get.
Fit in more places where community activities can happen. So it's not just strictly for one sport.
But with a price tag of $55 million, other locals were happy with the idea of a basic fix, otherwise known as Option 2.
I couldn't see the sense in spending hundreds of millions for that, especially when it is not actually used by everybody. Do you know what I mean?
Go to Option 2, I think. Yeah, that covers that.
Well, I reckon there's nothing wrong with the stadium. I was there. I played against the opening. I was there the opening night, playing against Otago when we opened the stadium. And there's nothing wrong with that stadium.
A Bell report commissioned for the Regional Council found that the stadium had returned about $100 million to Taranaki over a 15-year period. The same report found that the option to spend $14 million more and enhance the facilities would actually produce the best return on investment. David McLeod says he's hopeful the New Plymouth District Council, which manages the stadium's operations, can pitch in and help fund the enhanced upgrade. He says the Bell report shows the District Council is set to gain the most from events held at the stadium.
I think they should give it consideration, and I'm sure they will. They're prudent in what they do, so once they see the fact that the Bell report is delivered out the ratio that it is, I think it would be prudent, and I'm confident that they will run whatever process to see whether they're in a position to be able to support it.
What is clear is that ratepayers are going to have to foot the bill for the repair via a targeted stadium rate over the next 25 years. Households in New Plymouth and North Taranaki will pay $76 a year, up from an average of $20, while Stratford and South Taranaki ratepayers will pay $51 a year, up from an average of $11. And commercial and industrial ratepayers will pay $428 annually, up from an average of $100 a year. News of rates increases split the people of Stratford too.
No, not overly. I didn't realise it was going up 5 times. Yeah, no, I'm a little bit shocked.
55 sounds about right.
Everyone pays different, you know. Not everyone can pay the same. These families out there that struggle, you know. I would pay the extra money to get the better stuff.
Public submissions on the Yarrow Stadium proposal close on April the 23rd. The New Plymouth District Council says it's waiting to see the reaction to the various options before deciding what role it might play. I Taranaki mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin aho.
And just time for some of your feedback before the news at 6. A rap across the knuckles for me. This person says that I gave Terry Brown, who's one of the customs boss, too much of a hard time. He or she says, Lisa, the e-gate rejects my photo every time. I think you underestimate how often this occurs. The idea that the only person it rejected was Nolan and that the officer should have been solely looking for him is ridiculous. Thanks for your feedback. And this one says, this customs man is a walking, talking shrug emoji. It's everyone's fault but theirs. And this one says that's crap and just a lack of procedures. The man has committed an alleged criminal act and all the systems alerted them. It's a quiet airport compared with overseas. I bet it wouldn't happen in LA. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. There's a lot of comment on Air New Zealand, so hopefully we'll get to some of that a little later. But tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can reach us on 2101 on the text.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. A staunch critic of Air New Zealand, Shane Jones, is praising it for cutting domestic fares. The Regional Economic Development Minister has previously called the airline a corporate taniwha and said it needed to stop shortchanging the regions. But following the airline's announcement today that it's cutting fares on more than 40 routes by up to half, Mr Jones says that provided this is no gimmick, he needs to give credit where credit's due.
When you think about the putea we've spent in the Gisborne Airport and the Bay of Islands Airport, the fact that more travellers can move around Aotearoa at an affordable rate, obviously that's a positive outcome.
Shane Jones. However, Flight Centre's Commercial Director Brent Thomas says many will miss out on the lower fares as it'll mainly help those people who can book a long time in advance or are flexible with their dates. A convicted paedophile denies ever working for a group in Wellington that gives children music lessons. The group has suspended its weekend lessons at Island Bay School after admitting it did not run police checks on any tutors. It has told RNZ that about 18 months ago it briefly employed a keyboard tutor called Stephen Schoen as a reliever. Mr Schoen spent 7 years in prison till 2016 for sexual offending against 5 teenage girls who were students of his. However, he has told RNZ that he has never lived in Wellington nor been employed by the Wellington Music Centre. A senior customs official says a fugitive tourist bore only a passing resemblance to the photo in a passport he used to skip the country. James Nolan, who's wanted for assault and for being part of a roofing scam, managed to leave New Zealand by using someone else's passport. A customs officer failed to do further checks after the e-gate biometric system flagged that his photo didn't match the passport one. Customs Group Manager of Border Operations Terry Brown told Checkpoint he personally would have ordered more identity checks if he'd been on the gate.
There is a fleeting similarity, but the purpose of having invested in our e-gates and biometrics facial recognition technology is to ensure that it removes the human interface. They made an error in accepting the image as a match, and that's part of a review process that we'll undertake now.
Terry Brown of Customs. The liquidators of the collapsed construction giant Mainzeal say a court ruling released today sets an important precedent for reinforcing the obligations of company directors. Mainzeal went into liquidation in 2013, owing creditors $110 million. Today, the High Court has ruled its directors traded recklessly and are liable for $36 million in compensation to creditors. The liquidator at BDO, Andrew Bethel, welcomes the finding.
It just really, helped set the views on the standards of governance that are required by the Companies Act. And in our view, the directors of Mainzeal fell well short of those, and we're very pleased that the court agreed with us.
Andrew Bethel. One contractor left out of pocket by Mainzeal's collapse, Doug Hazelden, says it's taken years to get out of a financial hole and he doubts he'll get any money back because $36 million isn't enough to cover all creditors' losses. 3 people have been killed in a 4-vehicle crash west of Whakatane this afternoon. Emergency services say all 3 victims died at the scene. State Highway 2 has been closed near Hoone and Pikowai roads, and the police say it's unlikely to be reopened before 6:30. They want anyone who saw the crash to contact them, particularly a paraglider who was above the scene at the time. Lime has provided the Auckland Council with information about its e-scooters in a bid to have its licence suspension lifted. The company has been ordered to take its scooters off the road because of safety concerns over a software bug that causes wheels to unexpectedly lock up. 30 people have reported injuries as a result. The council asked for data and assurances from Lime on a range of issues relating to the irregular braking. It says it's examining the newly received information before making a decision about the licence. The United States has targeted the Venezuelan government with new sanctions. They were announced in the Colombian capital, Bogotá, where the American Vice President Mike Pence and Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaidó have been having talks. Mr. Guaidó says the situation in his country is a catastrophe that needs to be addressed by the international community.
With the support of all the international community and with all due respect to the Venezuelan constitution, but we need to come together in order to put a stop to this dramatic situation in our country. And given the crisis, I couldn't be subtle today in the use of language. On behalf of millions of Venezuelans, I will do everything in my power to find a solution to this crisis.
The translated words of Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaidó. It's 6:05. The Wanaka triathlete Braden Curry says he's feeling good about his chances heading into this weekend's New Zealand Ironman in Taupo. The 2017 champion went into last year's event with some sickness and was forced to withdraw midway through the bike stage. Curry says he's learnt from that.
You learn sort of what your body's capable of and what it takes to recover, and yeah, I guess I'm more cautious now of sickness and that than I probably was beforehand, but sometimes you just can't help it either. If you get sick, then you get sick and you have to deal with it. So, no, I think everything's looking pretty good this year.
Since last year's event, Curry has won the Asia Pacific Championship, was 5th at the World Championships in Hawaii, and rounded off his preparations for Ironman New Zealand with victory in Challenge Wanaka 2 weeks ago. While the Chiefs search for their first Super Rugby win of the season, head coach Colin Cooper is plagued by All Blacks' rest management requirements. Captain Brodie Retallick will be available on limited time, while Nepo Laulala, Nathan Harris and Anton Leonard-Brown will miss the clash against the Sunwolves at Waikato Stadium. And Roger Federer has begun his quest for his 100th ATP title with a 6-4, 3-6, 6-1 win over Philip Kohlschreiber in the first round of the latest event in Dubai. Doubles second seeds New Zealander Michael Venus and South African partner Raven Klaasen were beaten in the first round. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Trevor Reiki speaks with producer Ian Brennan about recording Pakistani microtonal vocalist Ustad Sami, whose latest album is called God Is Not a Terrorist. There's a window on the world of Liberian football star George Weah, and Eric Brenstrom has another global weather report, and a few stories from the Little Ice Age, when 1/2 metre of snow fell on Florida. That's Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For the whole of the North Island, mostly sunny. Isolated showers about Gisborne clearing this afternoon. Cloudy periods from Taranaki to Wellington tomorrow with isolated showers at night. For Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine. High cloud tomorrow with evening showers about western Nelson and the Kaikoura coast. Bulla, fine today. Drizzle turning to rain tomorrow afternoon with the chance of a thunderstorm, then clearing. Westland and Fiordland, drizzle developing this evening, a period of heavy rain tomorrow, followed by showers and possible thunderstorms. Canterbury mostly fine, showers spreading north from tomorrow afternoon with thunderstorms and hail possible. Otago and Southland, high cloud with a few spots of rain today. Scattered showers tomorrow with possible thunderstorms and hail. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 8 minutes past 6. You're with RNZ National.
And you're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Subcontractors, some of whom went bust when construction company Mainzeal collapsed, may finally get some of what they're owed after the court ordered its former directors to pay up to the tune of $36 million. The High Court found Dame Jenny Shipley and 3 others acted recklessly, breaching their duties as directors. Mainzeal was the country's 3rd largest construction company when it collapsed in 2013, owing creditors more than $110 million. BDO liquidator Andrew Bethel took the directors to court and says he's pretty satisfied with the result.
We obviously went for a range of outcomes that were ranged from slightly lower than that right through to much higher. But I think the main thing is this is a substantial award, and it should mean that creditors should get a meaningful distribution from this.
Yeah, so there was more than $100 million owing, and these were subcontractors. Basically, this insolvent company was using money that should have been for subcontractors to keep operating. So how significant is this money to them?
Well, I think different creditors had different experiences with it. It meant probably more so to others. Some, in fact, failed because of it. Others experienced significant distress. But no matter what, we were appointed in 2013, so it's been a long time. And so I imagine, and we've heard from a few today, that this means something to them.
So some of them went to the wall, Andrew. This is too late for some of them, I suppose.
Oh, that's right, and unfortunately, we'll be dealing with the liquidators of those companies to the extent that they still exist. So, yeah, that was one of the real shames of the Mainzeal collapse.
If we can go back to the judgment, what message do you think it sends to directors generally?
Oh, I think the directors obviously need to use good skill and judgment, and it just really helps set the views on the standards of governance that are required by the Companies Act. And in our view, the directors of Mainzeal fell well short of those, and we're very pleased that the court agreed with us.
Yeah, and saying that then, so there's 4 directors there. Dame Jenny is probably one of the most high profile. Did she use good judgment?
In our view, no. Dame Jenny, along with others, breached their duties, and that was our case in the court. And again, we're pretty happy that the court agreed with us.
So I noted that the judgment says that basically one of the directors, Richard Yan, is more responsible, more to blame in essence for what happened, and that he induced the other directors to kind of follow him along on this journey. So was Dame Jenny just a little bit unlucky in all of this?
Oh, I don't think it's a matter of being a little bit unlucky. I do think I did read the judgment around Richard Yan and him being more, I suppose, culpable, and that showed in the proportionality of the 36 million awarded. But we most certainly were of the view that throughout the period whilst Mainzeal was trading insolvently, that the other directors should have been challenging him a bit more.
So
a lot more, actually.
Yeah, a lot more in your view. So the judgment, is it really going to hurt these directors? Because they've got $20 million worth of insurance liability cover. The insurance pays out, they pay out, they just move on, don't they?
I think most certainly from a reputational point of view, it's not a good look. But we were pretty happy. We wanted to get some compensation for the creditors. We would have loved a bit more, but this is a meaningful amount of damages, and we'll go some way to compensate them. So while they might be covered for this, there will be some reputational damage.
Well, in terms of that reputational damage, are these directors fit to be on other boards?
I'm sure they've learned a lot through this process. Look, I couldn't comment on that.
Would you be happy to serve on a board with them?
I probably shouldn't comment on that.
And that's BDO liquidator Andrew Bethel there talking about the Mainzeal case where the directors, 4 of them, as he mentioned, have been ordered to pay up $36 million. In yet another twist along the Brexit road, Britain's Labour Party has said it's prepared to back another EU referendum to prevent a damaging Tory Brexit. Leader Jeremy Corbyn told Labour MPs the party will move to back another vote if their own proposed Brexit deal is rejected later this week. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, is under growing pressure to delay Britain's planned exit from the EU on March 29th. With more from Westminster is the BBC's Vicky Young.
For months, the Labour leader's been accused of dragging his feet, reluctant to swing behind another Brexit referendum, even though that's what many Labour Party members want. Tonight, he's taken a step in that direction. Jeremy Corbyn's allies say he's trying to keep the country together.
Whilst we have respected the results of the referendum and we have been trying to make sure that we leave in a sensible way, with this Prime Minister it is really very difficult indeed.
And you would campaign to remain if we got to that point, would you?
Of course I would campaign to remain, because I do think that's what's best for Britain.
And Jeremy Corbyn?
And I think that, of course, if it was a disastrous Tory Brexit or remaining, then Jeremy would campaign to remain.
Some, though, suspect this announcement is designed to stem the flow of disgruntled MPs from the party. Most of those who left last week have been pushing for a so-called people's vote. With Brexit Day drawing closer, former colleagues think this is the right solution.
The country has been divided on Brexit. The Labour Party and the Conservatives have been divided on Brexit. I think that this plan today starts to bring the Labour Party together. Yes, let's go for a deal if you want to do that, but let's also have the option to remain. You can only do that if you take this back to the British people and draw a line under this whole sorry saga.
The campaign for a second referendum has attracted thousands to marches across the country. But for MPs representing seats in the Midlands, the north of England and parts of Wales, there's concern that Labour could be accused of betraying the will of millions of people.
I have deep reservations about the idea of a second referendum. I think it would be very divisive for our country and for our communities. I think it would have a corrosive impact on the role and sovereignty of Parliament.
This is a shift in Labour policy, but there's still confusion over some of the detail. What, for example, would be the question put in any referendum. And there's huge uncertainty over whether enough MPs would back this policy in the House of Commons. Dozens of Labour MPs in the past have said they'd be reluctant to do so. And one said tonight this policy was so damaging it would prevent Jeremy Corbyn from ever becoming Prime Minister. For months, Labour has stuck to a carefully crafted Brexit policy. Jeremy Corbyn outlined his revised plan in a parliamentary meeting with MPs and soon discovered that when you please one group, you upset another.
Vicky Young with that report. Are Air New Zealand's much heralded cuts to some domestic fares a marketing stunt? The airline announced today it was cutting its lowest fares on 41 domestic routes, with 750,000 seats a year now costing less than $50. The carrier says regional New Zealand is one of the biggest winners and threw down the gauntlet to hotels, rental car companies and tourist operators to follow its lead. Irene King is the former CEO of the Aviation Industry Association and worked at Air New Zealand for many years. She's on the line now. Good evening, Irene. Tell us, well, is it as good as it looks?
Well, that's a really good question, isn't it? I mean, this morning I was quite excited about the prospect of a really substantial restructuring of their fare structure, but looking at their press release, you know, you've got to be a bit guarded, and it sounds like a formalisation of grab a seat.
So where do you think the hook or the devil in the detail is?
Well, I think they haven't really announced what their fare structure is. All I've said is there's going to be all these cheap seats in regional New Zealand. Now, we've had those cheap seats before. And, you know, what does it really mean? I mean, is it cheap seats on every flight or just on some flights or just at some times of the year? You know, it's to me, it's very confusing. They need to come out and be quite precise about what their fare structure is and what their fare bands are.
Spoke to Shane Jones earlier in the program, and obviously he's been a vocal critic. So I'm wondering, has that criticism swayed Air New Zealand, or what is driving this?
No, I don't think it's swayed Air New Zealand at all. Really, from what I can understand, and they made mention of this in their half-year report, the domestic leisure market has softened in terms of forward projected bookings, and that's giving them a lot of concern because that forward projection really it gives them a really clear indication of what their cash flow and what their profitability is going to be like in the back half of the year. Now, this move, I think, is just to stimulate the market, and good on them for doing that. I'm not decrying that, but my question is, is this their sustainable pricing structure, or is this just a dressed up, dollied up, grab a seat?
So you mentioned there that obviously softening projections, forecasts from them. Why would that be? What's driving that?
I think maybe New Zealanders might have been a bit travelled out, or they might have got a bit cynical about the pricing structures of Air New Zealand. They've had a bit of bad press in the New Zealand domestic market. Or alternatively, it could be as simple as they've decided that the summer's been so fantastic that I'll stay at home and enjoy my own backyard, not using them so frequently.
The thing is, a lot of people will be asking, Irene, if they can afford to do this now, have they been ripping us off over the years?
Well, I think there's a really strong perception that they have been rorting domestic, the regional areas of the country. But, I don't believe that to be so. I understand what their operating structures look like in regional New Zealand, and it's a really tough, very hard cost pressure market to make any dollars in. Where they make their money is on the main trunk.
So then how long do you reckon they could keep this up?
Well, if it's sustained, if it's sustained pricing, then it will be cemented into their pricing system, and they can keep it up for as long as they so choose. But the point being is that there will potentially come a pressure from fuel prices, and that will start to push those very low prices back up again.
One other thing, just before we go, they're calling on rental car operators, other tourist operators and hotels to lower their prices. What do you make of that, given the criticism that's been levelled at them for having high prices for a number of years?
Yeah, I think this is about, how competitive the New Zealand tourism industry is, say, relative to having a holiday in Australia or in the islands. And I've been noting that New Zealand outbound traffic to the islands and to Australia has been climbing quite dramatically. And so I think what they're saying is, come on, New Zealand domestic, our whole tourism infrastructure has got to be really price keen and price competitive, because otherwise New Zealanders are going to travel abroad.
Thank you for joining us this evening, Irene. Much appreciated. That is Irene King, who is she's an aviation commentator. The Customs Service is reviewing a major bungle by one of its officers that allowed the unruly British tourist James Nolan, who was wanted by the police, to skip the country. Nolan, who'd been charged with reckless driving, assault, and was also wanted for being part of an alleged roofing scam, used someone else's passport to fly out of New Zealand. A customs officer let him leave the country, even though the e-gate system flagged that his photo didn't match the one on the passport he was carrying. Ben Strang has more.
The Customs Minister, Chris Farfoy, says James Nolan used the passport of another foreign citizen who is currently visiting New Zealand when he fled the country. The passport hadn't been reported as lost or stolen, so customs officers weren't alerted when it was presented at Auckland Airport. They were alerted, however, when Nolan tried to move through the self-service e-gates and his face didn't match the picture on his passport. Customs Group Manager of Border Operations, Terry Brown, says a customs officer then stepped in to do a secondary check, but that's where the error was made.
We do have robust procedures and systems in place to protect our borders. The individual, James Nolan, deliberately circumvented border controls by using a valid passport that was not his own. The image was automatically sent to a customs officer who incorrectly identified Nolan as the passport owner. Unfortunately, that was a case of human error which shouldn't have occurred.
Terry Brown says it's not unusual for someone to be flagged up while passing through the e-gates.
Commonly it can occur in instances such as mother-daughter, where the daughter inadvertently passes through an e-gate using her mother's passport and the biometric identity accepts her as valid, only to find that then when the mother attempts to go through using the daughter's passport, that isn't accepted. But I would stress that this is the first instance that we've identified where a person has purposely sought to circumvent the controls through the fraudulent use of a valid passport.
Customs is now reviewing the botch-up. Chris Farfoy says the service needs to assure the public that it isn't letting the wrong people through New Zealand's borders. He says it's a serious breach and one they've vowed not to let happen again.
Oh, look, it's not ideal when someone uses their counterpart's passport to get out and it's not picked up. I'm told it's rare. I think we need to also be mindful that it's human error, but I think Customs is doing the right thing, reviewing what happened here to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and they've given me assurances again that it's rare.
As part of the review, the customs officer who let James Nolan through the border will undergo extra training and faces the possibility of having their role reduced. The police are investigating how Nolan came to have someone else's passport. For Checkpoint, Ben Strang.
And just a note on that story, Customs has told us that James Nolan left the country on the 26th of January. Just checked my diary, I was in court the last time James Nolan was in court. That was for a bail hearing. He was bailed on the 25th of January, so he skipped out the very next day after he was bailed. Auckland Transport looks to be changing its tune on a controversial cycleway deemed too dangerous for local kids, but until now only a medium priority to fix. Newton Central School in central Auckland had to suspend its walking bus along the northwestern cycleway after kids and their parents copped abuse from cyclists and were nearly hit on multiple occasions. Many blame a bottleneck in the path itself, but there's been no commitment from AT to a fast fix. The city's transport company was out on the cycleway this morning, and at least one boss says he'd like to see change faster. Rowan Quinn reports.
They are reflective, so some people put them around their ankle, around the wrists, that kind of thing. We've got the backpack covers.
Auckland Transport spent the morning trying to get the message to play nicely across to cyclists, luring them with free coffee, bells and safety gear. It set up a pit stop on the northwestern cycleway, a couple of 100 metres from the trouble spot where the cycleway narrows just as the kids join it on their way to school. AT's Networks and Safety Manager Randir Karma says he's been listening to everyone's concerns.
I've heard from a lot of cyclists have said to me, the solution here is to widen the path. Widen the path, separate the pedestrians, that's a good way to go.
That's a view shared by the cycling advocacy group Bike Auckland and Newton Central School, which sent a detailed proposal to AT nearly a year ago, but have seen nothing progress. Now Mr Karma says he'd like to co-design a solution with the two groups.
I've taken a walk along the pathway now with one of my engineers, and look, for most part, it looks viable. There's a few physical engineering constraints, retaining walls, trees and power poles and the like, so there's all those things we need to consider. So what I want to do almost immediately is kick off that investigation, understand the nature of the problem, what will it take to widen the path, what will it cost, and start to put a plan in place to actually get something delivered.
But Mr Karma admits he can't say how quickly the final work will happen because it's complicated and there are many landowners involved. In the meantime, he says people have to learn to respect each other on the shared path. It's hard to know whether today's pit stop reached the so-called lycra louts who parents and children say have acted aggressively towards them. Though it was busy all morning, the overwhelming majority of cyclists biked on past. Those who did stop, like Matt, were well aware of the problems.
I mean, guys are really scooting along there. You get sort of 100 kg big hairy guys like me, and you hit a child, or anybody for that matter, and it's, you know, I wouldn't like to think what would happen, to be honest.
And Paul, wearing full cycling kit, says though there are some people giving lycra a bad name, they're not the only ones to blame.
I mean, that comes down to experience as well, and you know, there's a lot of inexperienced cyclists riding electric bikes who are going very fast as well, so you know, I'm sure that they need to be careful with what they're doing as well.
Just up the path, some mums on the school run, like Anna, say they've seen signs of a change since publicity about the cycleway troubles last week.
Some guy just said hello to us, which was nice, because usually we're pretty scared of them because they yell at us to get out of the way. But today someone said good morning, Charlie?
Newton Central School's principal, Ricky Tetena, says the talk of speedy action on the cycleway sounds great, but the school will reserve judgment until it sees work actually begin. I Tāmaki Makaurau, more Checkpoint, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
And let's return to our earlier story. This is about Air New Zealand cutting some of its fares on 41 domestic routes, some of them being slashed by up to 50%. Many of you are concerned about CO2 emissions. Camilla says, why, when we really need to be cutting CO2 emissions, is our minister celebrating Air New Zealand cutting their ticket prices? Such damaging short-termism again, says Camilla. This from Davey, though. If the fares are viable, we have been rorted for years. $2,400 to Europe this year. The new Plymouth leg return is a sixth of the price, yet less than a 40th of the time in the air. Don't let Air New Zealand off the hook until they resume all discontinued links and subsidise regional flights with profits from the main trunk routes. That from Davey. Hey, thanks very much for all your feedback. Sorry we couldn't get back through everything today. There was so much of it. We will be back, obviously, same time, same place tomorrow with Checkpoint.
Official says a fugitive tourist bore only a passing resemblance to the passport photo he used to skip the country, and if he had been on the border gate he would have ordered more checks. A staunch critic of Air New Zealand, Shane Jones, is praising the airline for today's domestic fare cuts. The liquidators of the collapsed construction giant Mainzeal say a ruling that its directors were reckless and must pay back $36 million sets an important precedent. And police want to hear from any eyewitnesses to the 3-fatality crash near Whakatane, particularly a paraglider flying overhead at the time. Our next news is at 7.
RNZ National, with a fresh take on the day's news at 10 every weeknight with Karen Hay.
You know, they've soiled their reputation.
Including the latest national and international news from the RNZ News team.
On Twitter, Donald Trump ordered a temporary halt to hostilities.
And always live when and where we need to be.
Pretty disappointed with that, actually. Your bulk